We had so much fun and we did such cool stuff. And then to get attention like we've been getting for that season 5 is like the biggest pat on the back. We get to go to Emmys sitting in a room full of people who work on all these big shows and amazing projects. And there's just like this little Canadian, this motley little crew of Canadian artisans and technicians. Like, oh, just kind of neat to be representing Toronto and Canada on that level. I started season 1 of What We Do in the Shadows, so I've been on it for the entire 6 seasons. I decorated the first 3 seasons, and then I moved up to production designer. And then season 4, I found Aaron through the DGC, and I convinced him to come and work on the show. And so for season 4, he was the art director with me there, and it was pretty heavy. We did a lot of work, pretty fun stuff.
When Shayne reached out to me, I was actually kind of ready for a bit of a holiday. I had just talked to someone and I said, the only show that could even possibly sway me from not working for a bit is What We Do in the Shadows. And then sure enough, a couple of weeks later, Shayne calls me. You don't get necessarily to work on shows that you're a fan of all the time. And this is kind of like a big one. Big fan of like British comedy and Matt Berry. And Shayne seemed lovely. And so I figured, why not join the team and give it a go.
I was so glad you did. And then in season 5, when we realized, oh my gosh, this little show is not so little anymore, and there's way too much for one art director, because like you literally can't be on location, opening sets, in Zoom meeting, doing budgeting, overseeing builds, managing graphics, talking to props, set deck, stunts, all like this is way too much. And so we convinced them we needed more help. And how lucky were we to get Jody, Clement to join the team.
Shayne called me up and I didn't even take a second to say yes. I too am a fan of the show. So I was super excited to join the team.
It's surprising to me how much work goes into like the 23 minutes, because it's not just, a sitcom. It's like sitcom, but it has like a necromancer's hut or like a, like a whole gothic something or other that we have to build from scratch, and it all happens very fast. It's very impressive that we get what we get done. I'm always very proud of whatever we've done.
Oh yeah, for sure. When we started in season 1, we had a smaller budget than we did by the time we were doing season 6, and we didn't have time or money to actually reupholster furniture. So my quick and dirty trick was to, take an antique couch that was maybe like cream color or just like wrong, and I would paint the wood in like a shiny black and then do like a gold overlay and then beat it up a bit. But then we would also paint the fabric so that we didn't reupholster it. We would just take it to a deep burgundy or a sickly mint green that would make a vampire look more vampirish if they're sitting in it. And that just became the thing we did on the show, because it was just fast, and you could take an antique piece of furniture and like zhuzh it up and really quickly with some paint and some tassels and some distressing. And then that sort of just really became a signature thing we did all across the board all the time. Even later on, when we could maybe afford the time and the money to reupholster, it was like, well, no, we're just going to paint it and it's going to work. That was just one of the tricks that we had in our arsenal to get things to be camera ready and interesting and feel textured and like they'd been around for hundreds of years.
The department as a whole, I think, is a really strange and wild department to work in. Art is a very interesting kind of like zenness to it, where people hand us things and we have to make it a lot of the times just from scratch. And I think it's really wild, where they're like, hey, this is this thing I've dreamed up. It's this weird potion bottle with a label on it. It's going to do all this stuff. And we have to go and we have to make that out of thin air. There's a lot of departments that do that, maybe not on such a grand scale so much sometimes, like build whole spaces that are for people to inhabit and whole books that, to leaf through. I always found that very interesting, and I think the show had it in spades.
It's super fun and super inspiring. I mean, there's no limits really, because we are present day and we are vampires. We can pull finishes and inspiration and shapes and silhouettes from, Victorian, Baroque, from medieval. It's not a limiting palette. So there's like so many places we can turn to for inspiration or for resources, or for materials. We get to know our characters so well that it just becomes ingrained in me what a certain type of fabric would be in an Andor environment, or what Nadja would reach for. And these just things just become instinctive to the choices we make for these characters. Each one has a palette, basically. Colin's world, he's boring. Everything's beige and bland and oatmeal and just like really not exciting. And, Nandor is more colorful and El Canadorian. And we just instinctively take on their palettes, and everything that we put together for them just falls in line. But it's also so forgiving, and we jump around, we make things up, we'll pair things oddly together, because they've lived for hundreds of years. So they've collected things along the way from different time periods. And oftentimes when I can't sleep, I go on Kijiji and I'll type in like Victorian chair and see what comes up. And I'll screen grab all these things and I'll send it to the buyers and the decorator. Be like, get this, get these crazy lamps. These are so cool and rare. That's just how my brain works. Like, that's one of the things I do to relax, is I look at antiques on Kijiji. That's just me.
My first time working with Shayne, I was in awe of watching her describe to the set decorators how to modify an existing chair. And one of my favorite things was when she described putting an antler party up along the back of the head of the chair. I think it was Antler Party.
Oh, I think it was an antler festival. I was like, I don't know.
Antler
chair. Take the fabric. We'll put a fur inlay. We'll add some tassels. Then I was like, oh, and right behind it, because it was a tall chair, it was for Nandor. I was like, right behind him, we'll do like an antler festival, meaning like, let's just get 12 pieces of antler and screw them together. And so it would create like a halo. That's the fun of what we do in the shadows. We could just do stuff like that. And then once you paint it and glue the stuff on and distress it and add some fur, and then you put it on camera and it looks amazing. It's like taking all the cliches of vampirism and antique things and all the tricks we have and just like throwing them together and making something cool. One of the things that I personally aim to do when I was decorating and as a production designer is I like to give the actors an environment that they feel they can do their best work in. So if you give them a set, that it's maybe not like, oh, that's a comedic lamp, but it's like, oh, that lamp plays into helping them feel and believe that they are where we're pretending they are. So every little detail is like another layer in creating an environment that's 360 for them. And I've seen it. I've seen when an actor walks on set and they're like blown away. And that's the biggest accolade or the biggest compliment to us, I think, is when the people who have to be emotional or be ridiculous and they feel like they're in a space that they can believe that they're in. Like, I think that's how we add to the comedy in the design and in the dressing. And we give them a space that they can do their best work in.
Like when we did Little Antipaxos and we went to the classic Toronto Ted's Diner location and we built that whole walk and talk scene. Nadja was looking in the windows, and I believe there were some Easter eggs in the window of that souvenir shop.
Yeah, we've all squeaked in our own little jokes. Nothing too crazy, but a lot of the times the writers will see it and be like, oh, this is great. It's exactly the tone of this character. The language of the show is in everybody because everybody on the show is a fan. Like, everybody is really happy to work on the show and give themselves as much as they can to make everything just a little bit shinier and a little bit happier and a little bit more funny.
I've always loved doing the bigger sets and the more complicated, bigger things like the night market are very satisfying and exciting. But for some reason, when we designed season 4, when I designed the kitchen set, adding a kitchen to the mansion felt like the right thing to do. Like, every home needs a kitchen, even though they don't eat, they're vampires. It was super satisfying to design that, and we really dove into the details. And sometimes when you have these smaller spaces, you can spend time with the textures and the layers and the details that we can do in these moments and in the little sets. It's fun. Weekend at Morgan Manor, there's a lot of fun things that we did in that episode. I think my favorite set that we did from that episode was probably the Belfry Tower. And it's maybe because it was a more technical build, and it was like, how are we going to create this tower so we have a good ascent for the guide and for Nadja, and then they get to the top, and then there's this, light effect that happens, and then Nadja falls through the floor. So there's the big stunt of that. And I mean, it's like a 6-second scene. I mean, I don't know. There's so much work and so much thought goes into it. And then it's like you're watching the episode, you can just like see it, and then it's done. And you're like, oh, wow, so much work we did.
I really loved the Morgan Manor basement with the cages, with the actors all being different heights. We had to figure out how to build them so they all had the same sight lines so they could see through the cages. We had big vats filled with blood, and for Colin, we had High C, the orange drink. And I don't know if the audience caught that, but the drink line for him, like you would have in a mouse cage or a hamster cage, was actually High C. So yeah, I think that was my favorite because it had so many layers and so many elements. And also, I loved the bulletin board that the guide had on the wall with all of the sketches of how she was accomplishing her evil plan to capture all of the vampires. I love those types of Easter eggs that we were able to provide.
The end result is so cool. Our showrunner wanted that in his office afterwards. Like, bring that up to my office. It's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
I had a favorite element in Morgan Manor. Those portraits of the four main characters that the guide paints, which I think you can get as a poster. It's nice. It's nice to know that the stuff that you've worked on, people value it so much that they'll put it up on their walls.
We had so much fun, and we did such cool stuff. And then to get attention like we've been getting for that season 5 is like the biggest pat on the back. It's the proverbial industry high five. It's like, we did it, yeah.
And this episode that we were nominated for was pretty much the biggest episode. Perdita's mansion, you had to come up with what her character was and what she lived like. The fact that she had a fencing gym in her house, the winding staircase that went up to a bell tower.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of work to do for that episode. It was all hands on deck.
Well, what's cool, we get to go to the Emmys, sitting in a room full of people who worked on all these big shows and amazing projects. And there's this little Canadian, this motley little crew of Canadian artisans and technicians. Like, oh, just kind of neat to be representing Toronto and Canada on that level. It's amazing that this show has done so well in Toronto. It's an American show. A lot of the actors are from the UK, but in a lot of ways, it's a Canadian show because of all of the hands and the talents and the hearts and the brains of the crew. And like you say, the artisans, all Canadian. And that's so satisfying. That's so exciting for us to see our friends and our coworkers doing their best work and, getting accolades for it and being so proud of it and being part of something and having it have this Canadian aura and this stamp of Toronto all over it. That's a huge source of pride for me. I've never been on a show that has such a huge and diehard fan base, to the point where I even got recognized once just walking down the street as, are you the production designer from What We Do in the Shadows? It was like, what? How do you know who I am? Like, that's insane. But that's a testament to the Toronto crews, to the IATSE members, to the DGC members, and it's also a testament to the writers and the actors, and to every single person who works on the show. We all own a piece of that, and it's just really cool to experience that. I'm not sure if I'll ever experience that again.
Speaking to the talent that we have in the DGC, when you have shows that you have no idea what you're applying for, you're just sending in a resume, but everybody who sent their resume was a fan of the show. Everybody had something to say about What We Do in the Shadows. So it was nice to see.
There are so many people that I have worked with since, and they find out that I've worked on the show, and they're just like, you worked on Shadows? That's incredible. I meet people, I meet fans, and they're like surprised that it's made in Canada. They're a lot of the times they're like, oh, that's in Toronto. A lot of people still are like surprised that such a wonderful and high quality show that's so funny, is just shot down the road from them.
It was a creative playground, and we were really allowed to create and play, and I'll miss it. gonna miss everybody and like this family we built, the teams and the love that we had and the fun that we had. We were there for 6 years, and a lot of the people on the show started as my good friends, you know, like people I've worked with for decades and have known for a long time, and we just created this family. And then I got other good friends like these guys along the way, and that's really going to be hard to replicate in the future.
I agree.
I don't know if you'll still do this, guys, but we had talked about getting like a bat tattoo or something at some point, and I still think I'm probably going to do that to just kind of signify that little era in my life.
It was a phenomenal experience working on What We Do in the Shadows.
What we did in the shadows.
What we did in the shadows. No, don't do it. See?
Sad.